I do like to call this session on interviewing, "It's not bragging if it's a fact." And the reason for that is I spend far too many times in conversations with people who say, "I just don't like talking about myself. I am an award-winning author. I am an award-winning speaker." There, I said it. In this context, you're looking at me saying, "God, I hope he tells me something about interviewing." But you have to be willing to say the great things about yourself in the right context. Do I run up and down the aisles and run up and down the streets saying, "Oh, look at me"? I hope not. But if you're in the middle of an interview, I hope that you do. And it's not look at me constantly, because the interview really isn't about you. It's really about finding that great connection and that relationship with the interviewer and that company. You may find after the interview it's not for you, and so be it. But you want to get that nice, comfortable relationship. But you are not going to get where you want to be if you're not willing to tell people where you've been and where you want to go. And a good example of that is I was in the interview session. I went through 8 interviews for a management development position when I was young. I got to the final interviews. I got into the next person's office and they said, "Tom, you were number 16. I said, "Woo!" They said, "We're taking 50. And I said, "What's going on?" They said, "Because you didn't tell us enough about yourself. We don't know anything about it." But I said, it's sitting there on my resume. It's all there. And they said, "Are you expecting me to read all?" And that's lesson number 1, and you have to learn to be able to talk about yourself. I'm going to ask some questions. And when it comes to interviewing, the one thing you want to walk away with is stop trying to memorize answers. Stop trying to figure out what the interviewer wants. And we're going to talk a lot about what we think the interviewer wants, but it doesn't mean try to formulate your answers based off of what you think they want. It's just get yourself comfortable and start to find how to be yourself and still meet their needs. I got some of these questions out of a Forbes magazine, out of a Forbes article so many years ago, and some out of a CNN article. If you were a superhero, who would you be and why? You don't have to answer. And every time you entered a room, what would be your theme song and why? On a scale of 1 to 10, how weird are you? Quick, name as many uses for a brick as you can in 1 minute. How many hotels are in the U.S.? Why are these questions relevant? Why?
See how fast you can think on your feet.
Okay, a lot of it is thinking quickly on your feet.
Also, see, just if you could let us fast, how you conceptualize the problem.
How you can solve a problem.
It gets you more closely engaged with your speaker. It's not just a cut and dry yes or no answer. It gets you to talk.
You know, one of the toughest questions for people to answer is, what's your greatest accomplishment? Do you believe that? Because they can't put it out there. So again, to your point on thinking conceptually, solving problems, being willing to absorb the question, listening to it, and then coming out with, is there a right or wrong answer to any of these? There's usually not. And as soon as you get comfortable with there's no right or wrong answer to something, you can then take a breath, think it through, and then give a thoughtful answer. We're looking for thoughtfulness. We're looking for answers that make sense. We're looking for little quirky answers if you need to. But I'm also looking as an interviewer for the look on your face. How many times have you been in an interview and said, "I don't know"? Have you ever said, "I don't know" in an interview? Good. Don't. There are so many people that you'll ask a question, and so what's your greatest accomplishment? Well, I don't know. Do you want personal? Do you want professional? What do you want? And now you're taking the interviewer down this wrong path. I am looking to see how you deal with pressure. You are in a pressure-filled situation. That's a fact. You're going to be nervous. That's okay. You want to take a deep breath and give answers that still relate to who you are as a real person. Don't try to give the answers the way that you think that the person is. But what happens with these types of questions is you're going to answer based off of your background, you're going to based off of your skills, based off of your trends, based off of your patterns. You'll start to figure out how to handle some of these questions, and you start to develop this pattern and a trend in the interviewer's mind. Because I really don't want to know what's happening in the past. I want to know how you're going to translate these things into what you can do for me and my organization in the future. And by establishing a pattern, what's happening in the interviewing world today is you're getting a lot more behavioral-based, situational-based interview-type questions. And these are intentional to establish a pattern. That pattern is, most people, the leopard usually doesn't change its spots type thinking. And I want to give you an example. Any Patriots fans out there? This is safe in Westford. Anyone remember Aaron Hernandez?
Yeah.
And what did he do? He was convicted of murder. But what happened before that? He was accused of being of murder. He was involved in some other situations that were out there. I believe there are accusations that he shot somebody in the face, in addition to the murder. When he was a freshman in college, there were questions about what he was doing. There's some potential gang violence that's in there, and all of a sudden, you start to look back at this past, and what do you see? A pattern. And you get, and I don't want to put murder and interviewing in the same context. I just want to show them as an analogy to say, you're establishing a pattern. That's what the interviewer is trying to get from you, is what pattern do you want to walk away with? What is the story you want told about you? So when you start thinking in terms of pattern, when someone says, give me a situation, a problem you had to resolve at work, and how'd you deal with it? How'd you deal with a disruptive coworker? It's a forward-looking question, but in reality, I'm looking back at your past and how you dealt with those in the past, in the pattern you're starting to establish. If your typical response is, I go get my manager, you're starting to establish a pattern of you can't think independently on your feet. Do you see how these things are starting to tie together? And I think you had a hand up. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So I think Monday morning I was listening to NPR and they were talking about the college candidates and article dodging.
The article
And that, if somebody got a hard question, they might say, oh, that's a great question. Because it gives them a little time to think about how they're going to answer.
There is
They're
nothing.
Answer, though. Is that okay to say?
There is nothing wrong with saying, that's a great question, or let me think about that for a second.
Or are they going to think you're playing the game? You're up to something.
If I start to say, I think you're trying to pull one over on me, or there is this underlying current, and I know you're playing a game with me, the interviewers aren't playing a game. They want to surprise the heck out of you. They want to put you under pressure. They want to see if you can think quickly on your feet. Okay, everyone knows the game now. What they really want to know is, are you thoughtful in your answers? Are you trying to BS them? Are you trying to be someone that you're not, and all of a sudden you're going to get this job and not like it anyway? One of my close friends was in the HR business for so many years, and he once described the interview as a first date. When you're on your first date, you've got the tie going, you've got the suit going, I'm on my best behavior. Hopefully she's on her best behavior. We're all trying, the two of us are trying to be the top of our game. Remember, from that point forward, it goes down. In a good way, we hope. But you get more comfortable with each other. And if this is the most pressure-filled, packed event that you're going to have, if I'm giving you my best foot forward, and I walk away from the interviewer as the person asking questions saying, you were average to me, if that's your best foot and you're giving me average, I start to have questions about it. So that's where you want to start thinking about the patterns that you do. So let's talk about what you think interviewers want. What do you think they want?
How can we solve their problem?
We are here to solve your problem. I've read a great article recently on cover letters, by the way. they're going to the way of the dinosaur. We don't want a cover letter anymore that says blah, 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 here's my resume, because that's really what cover letters say. You want to say, I know you have a problem and I'm the person to solve it for you. So you think in terms of I'm your problem solver. Those come out in interviews, they should come out in cover letters. It's I am here to solve a problem. You want to find a way to creatively differentiate yourself in an interview. What else are people looking for?
Be confident.
Absolutely. Confidence trumps accuracy all the time. It doesn't mean fudge your answers. It means that don't guess your answers. It just means be confident with what you do know. I'm not sure about this piece, but let me give you another one. And for those that are looking to improve their skills on thinking quickly on your feet, I'm not sure if there's a club here in Westford, but if you join Toastmasters International, very, very cheap. It is, one of the things you work on is what they call table topics, 1 to 2 minute questions, and you think quickly on your feet. And you learn the power of the pause. You learn the power of thinking things through. So it's okay to be able to say, let me think about that for a second. What you shouldn't say in an interview is the words, I'm sorry. Don't apologize for not knowing an answer. Don't apologize for thinking it through. Don't apologize for going down a path that you chose to take yourself down. Don't apologize. You're there, you're confident, and apologies take away from your confidence, and they take away from your credibility. As soon as you say, I'm sorry, now if you really screw something up, sure, but I'm sorry comes out way too much. Yes?
I don't want to go off topic, but you mentioned Toastmasters, and I'd like to confirm this, I believe meetings in this room.
Yes.
And they are requesting more members, it's concerned about the number of members, so I figured I'd throw that out there.
It is $36 every 6 months. It is the greatest $36 I spend every 6 months. Toastmasters changed my life and career.
You know what night they meet here? I think it's Monday evening, I believe.
If you go to Toastmasters.org, there is a locator, and put in Westford, it'll tell you exactly the time and place. Yes?
There's also one in Acton that also meets on Mondays.
Okay. These are ways, it's networking, it's learning to communicate effectively. I learned to think quickly on my feet, which was my Achilles heel. But back to what interviewers want, is they want confidence. We're not looking for a perfect answer. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in the perfect answer. There is no perfect answer. So be confident, be clear, be concise, but be willing to stop talking too. And you have to learn to make it a two-way conversation. When it comes to interviewing, look at your LinkedIn profile, look at your resume, talk to people that you know, go back to past performance appraisals, know yourself better than anyone else that's out there. And what do I mean by that comment? Know yourself better than anyone else out there.
Basically, it's to be able to answer any question confidently about you without having to think about it because you already know all those pieces.
Then, if that's the case, then why is what's your greatest accomplishment one of the toughest questions for people to answer? That's the point I'm getting to, is that you have to be willing to say, is your greatest accomplishment going to be the same tomorrow or in another interview? Can it be different? Absolutely. Does anyone know your list of accomplishments that are this long? No. Pick a couple and move. Use those, confidently answer, and stick to it. We could go around the table and have every one of you ask me my greatest accomplishment, and I'd be willing to change it every answer. And it should be invisible to you. It should be seamless to you. It should be given with confidence. And there is no perfect answer. It should be your willingness to go down that path and keep going. There was a point you wanted to make?
It's always been kind of driven home that you shouldn't mix your business life with your personal life. However, when you're pointing to some accomplishments, some of it may be intertwined. Is that okay, or should you stick more to the business side of it?
The question is on the mixing of personal and business. If you want to come in and say, my greatest accomplishment is being a father, it's not going to come across so well in a job interview. But if I could say that I can balance those things together, and maybe I come in and say I can get more done in 40 hours in a work week, to be able to balance, to volunteer at other activities, and show an effective balancing of work and family and work life. I met my new boss yesterday in person for the first time. I got a new boss in my full-time job, and we're sitting down, and the first thing I do is I hand him a bookmark. And I do this with every new boss. And I hand him a bookmark. I said, listen, I write books. I do speaking on the side. My primary responsibility is my job. You tell me to stop, I'll stop. Which means I wouldn't have come today if you told me to stop, so he didn't tell me to stop. And the reason I shared that with him, and it's the same thing in an interview, the reason I shared that with him is I can effectively balance my work in life to the point where you don't want someone, if someone comes in and they tell you the greatest accomplishment is I can work 80 hours a week for you, I don't want you. Because you probably don't work very efficiently or effectively. And you may not even play well in the sandbox with others because you're trying to do too much on your own. So see how all of a sudden I'm getting these perceptions about who you are? Back to the question on personal and professional. Your first lean should always be on your professional accomplishments. However, if you have something that's out there that shows other skills, and this is good for people that are currently not working right now, but you're volunteering, that is just as good as a paying job. You do not have to be paid to learn skills. And so use those in an interview. And if you were to come out to someone and say, here are the skills that I own, and on the side I run a little business where I'm a landlord. All of a sudden, that personal piece over here turns into, and let me tell you what I've learned from being a landlord. I've learned accounting. I've learned how to run a business. I've learned how to solve problems. I've learned how to plunge toilets. I've learned how to do these things that make me skilled as a problem solver. Or I knew nothing of the business, so I dug in and talked to other landlords, or I looked on the internet because everything on the internet's right. And I figured out how to do this, and I learned from my mistakes. When you start to bring a skill in with that comment about the personal, now you're starting to establish that pattern and that trend you want. We want to be able to think quickly on our feet. We also want to be able to be clear and concise in our comments. I asked someone, tell me, oh, it's not even asking, it's tell me a little bit about yourself, was the first question I asked. It gives me a chance to organize my thought, get a feel of who that person was. It was a phone interview. I hit mute, and I sat there for 20 minutes. Tell me a little bit about yourself. 60 seconds is what you were offered today, which always turns into 3 minutes. But that's okay. But you want to be able to be clear and concise. You want to be able to have a conversation. You want to be able, and by the way, there is no number on tell me about yourself. It has to be 2 minutes. It has to be 3. It has to be 5. It has to be clear and concise and meaningful. If you find yourself rambling on and babbling, and I've had people say, oh, I'm just rambling on, I'm so sorry. Once again, you said, I can't communicate effectively, I'm not clear and concise, and my credibility just went down the tubes because I said I'm sorry. And that's a very big thing. These are what interviewers are looking for. Confidence, ability to be clear and concise, think quickly on your feet. Independent thinking. And what do I mean by that?
Seeing a problem and trying to tackle it yourself instead of waiting for somebody to ask you to tackle it. Trying to
Yeah. Has anyone ever had a problem at work? Yeah, just check. What is your first gut reaction? Roll up the sleeves and fix it? Or call someone to fix it for you? Let's go back to the landlord example. Toilet needs plunging. You going to call someone to do it, or are you going to try to fix it yourself? And I use that example just for illustrative purposes, maybe not the right illustration, but the point is you want to give answers that show that you have an independent thought process, but you're also a team player. So what I mean by this is think about examples. This is your time where you can start jotting down examples where you've thought independently, where you've solved problems, because we want problem solvers, not problem dumpers. And you're going to get behavioral or situational based questions of, give me an example where you had to solve a problem at work. Give me an example where you've had to deal with a tough coworker. How'd you solve a problem in a small group when none of you got along? Do you have those situations in your back pocket ready to go? This isn't about memorizing answers. This is about knowing where in your arsenal to go to get some of these answers. And there's a couple people here with current jobs who are looking for other jobs. You also want to make it very clear that I lost my job after 23 years. They paid my paycheck for 23 years. That's not a bad thing. Was I disgruntled after? Yeah. Was I going to go running back in? No, I won't go down that path. I was appreciative of what they had. Hopefully they were appreciative of mine. I met a lot of good friends, had a lot of good colleagues there. And I walked away. When I walked out that door, I said to myself, I am not going to be negative about this company. Am I mad? Sure. Get over it and start looking for your new job. And because you don't want those emotions to weigh you down. And those will weigh you down. They will weigh you down on what you're looking for, your perceptions. And so it's not the I'm bitter about this company, or even if you have a good job right now, it's what are the positive things that you're looking for? You mentioned you want to grow. I might take some things out of the comments, such as, it might be out of my skill set, or the job is getting more complex, and I'm making up words. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I'm thinking along those lines. Those are things that come out of our mouth, and all of a sudden we turn this negative thing into my past versus this positive thing of what I'm looking for in the future for your job. So make it clear that you want what you're currently interviewing for, not what you're leaving. Side note, on the job description itself, if the job description is more than 50% of your skill set, go for it. Put your application in. Stop looking to be the perfect candidate. Because when people are writing the job descriptions, they are writing job descriptions based off of the absolute perfect candidate. Does that exist? No. You'd be shocked how many people don't apply because they say, I only have half of the skill set that they're looking for. It might even say, I'm looking for a college degree. Even if you don't have one, but you need everything else, and you have experience, put the application in. You'd be shocked how many times a job decision, once you get into the interview, it's a wide open ballgame. And that's what you want to do, is get yourself in and use the key words to get yourself into the interview, and then work through the other stuff. If they say, well, you don't have these skills, say, sure, but give examples where you have been a consummate learner and come up the learning curve along with it. Positive attitude, obviously, but your ability to take that past history that you have and translate it into a skill set that we have. I know that there's a lot of software engineers here, a lot of people in the medical field, but it's okay. There's somebody who said it doesn't have to be in medical devices, I believe one of the comments was. Because you're looking to take transferable skills. And that is a skill, to be able to take what you've done in the past and put it somewhere in the future. Let me give you a perfect example. I've been in the financial industry for 25 years. Most of my work was in call centers. 20 of the 23 years had something to do with call centers. I know my way around a call center and customer service and management, administrative, incentive plans, all of that. I knew nothing of risk management. I started to pick up some of those skills in my last couple of years, but there's no way you would consider me an expert. My job right now, and I'll edit this out of the video, is I'm an operational risk manager. And the person said to me, I'm glad you have a little bit of a background in risk, but I'm looking for a relationship manager, and you convinced me that you are a relationship manager. I used the skills that I had in dealing with people to translate them into the future one, and showed enough of the ability, a taste enough to say I have risk skills. You have to be able to translate into what they're looking for. So when you're looking at the job description, it doesn't mean mimic the words that are on the job description. It just means align them. And go through it and underline keywords that grab your attention and start circling them and say, where are some times or examples where I've used those skills in past jobs? Now you're making the leap. That's what interviewers want. They want to know what you can do for me. Interviewers usually go in it saying, what's in it for me? What can I do to take me and shove it into the interviewers, in front of the interviewer and say, look at me. That's not what it's about. It's about establishing a relationship with someone. It's about being that person. If you're shy, it's okay to be shy in the interview. It's okay to just be who you are. With confidence. Shy and confidence can go hand in hand. I'm not funny, just ask my wife. I'm not going to go into an interview and try to be funny. I just can't. I've tried it, by the way. It has failed miserably. When you're trying to be someone that you're not. So we want, as interviewers, want you to be who you are, but we're also looking for someone to differentiate themselves. And what do I mean by that? How do you distinguish yourself among the other candidates?
In some ways, you can do it with the preparation that you've done by specific questions related to the job or the business or future plans.
Yeah, so let's go around the table here. How many times did we hear today medical devices or software engineering, very similar skill sets? Did we not? Guess what? They're your competition. Not really, because you're really competing against yourself. But if you think of it that way, a lot of you might have similar backgrounds. You might have similar skill sets. And guess what? You're going to come across on paper very similar. It's just natural. It's going to happen that way. So you have to find those things that will differentiate yourself from someone else. Can it be quirky? Sure. Does it have to be? No. But if you've done an awful lot of volunteering somewhere, can you add that into the interview? Because we're thinking in terms of interviews as Q&A. You ask me a question, I answer it. You ask me another question, I answer it. Take that completely out of your mind. The question is the start of a conversation that you might have at Thanksgiving. If you look at it that way, as I'm having a conversation with someone, which is no different than what I would do in a networking session, your mindset changes a little bit. Maybe your nerves get eased up just a little bit, and you start to be able to have a real-life conversation. Because in a Q&A, I clam up as soon as I think I answered the question, then I stop, I fold my hands, and then I wait for the next question. When you do that, you're losing that ability to build relationships. When you're building a relationship in this, you can have the ability of, well, give me an example where you had to resolve a problem with someone. Well, that naturally fits into, let me give you an example, but not every interviewer is going to ask you that. They might ask you, what's your greatest accomplishment? Well, I might go down and list my 3 and clam up and do this. Or I can say, and let me give you an example of why I feel, and then you can go into the elaboration. If you stay clear and concise, you should be able to say, let me give you an example 90% of the time. And that should be a killer phrase of yours in the interview. Let me give you an example, or here's an example. Or let me share a time where I've done that with you, because that's what we're looking for, is I want proof that you've been able to do it. I want an example that you can put on the table and say, how many times have we come out and said, I'm a great communicator, I'm a great leader? Have I told you anything? No. But if I can come out and say, maybe I've written some books. I was told I was a communication major in college. I was told for 18 years of my performance appraisals I couldn't communicate. I was told I couldn't write.
You're marking the
I put a book in front. I tell them I've written a book, and that instantly goes away. You may not like the book. There might be typos everywhere. Sorry, editorial specialist. But I'm building credibility by differentiating myself. Part of the conversation I had with my boss, which in reality yesterday was an interview for me. I'm trying to build credibility with him, and it was a great conversation. It wasn't a Q&A. And I told him I needed the day off on February 5th. I told him why, because I am the announcer at the U.S. National Toboggan Championships in Camden, Maine. And he's like, what? And so now we start having a conversation, and it's quirky, it's fun. He starts asking me about it, and now we're into a natural part of a conversation. We're both a little bit more at ease. And that's what interviewers should be. You should should get the interviewer comfortable with who you are. And sometimes I think we forget to put our personal piece on it. We're so afraid, and we try to stay nice white collar, uptight. As soon as you learn to relax, you can be nervous and still be relaxed and be personal in what you're trying to do. Yeah.
I have a question about certain words that I don't know if you think are overused in the interview. I hear a lot of people say, I have a passion for this and a passion for this. Do you think that's overused? Or are there other ways?
Well, let me give you my perspective, basically. Like, it's one of those things that comes in, if it starts to come in as filler for you, it needs to have, I'm passionate because, and let me give you an example. I am passionate about communication because I was told for 20 years I couldn't communicate, and I finally got it hit into my thick head. I needed to do something about it. I joined Toastmasters International. I became a member of the National Speakers Association, and I've written some books which has significantly improved my ability to communicate with people. Yes, I am passionate about communication. It's okay to say it, but you can't say I'm a passionate leader, I'm a passionate communicator without following it up with an example. Clear, concise, 30 seconds, you're fine. But if you start finding yourself repeating over and over, and two I use basically in perspective because those are two that pop in the word literally these days. I'm literally a good communicator. Really?
Let me be honest with you.
Let me be honest. Are you going to lie to me now? And so, in the filler word so, I just added in there for fun. If you start finding yourself repeating, take a different tack and take a hard left turn on yourself, and you'll break out of that trap. But here are some of the pitfalls that people fall into. Is that lack of confidence. We come in and we're waiting for someone to grill me. I went through 8 hours of interviews. They were going to take 2 people to manage 750 people in Rhode Island. Guess what number I was? 3. And I'm convinced, besides being told that I need to do a little bit more networking, there's some networking lessons that are in there. I didn't do a good enough job in talking about myself. I didn't do a good enough job of making my story come alive in their eyes. And it was one of those, I couldn't get across to the personal side of it, and so things really tightened up in the interview, but I burned myself by saying, after 8 hours of interview, and I was trying to be funny, and I'm not, just ask my wife, I said, whew, I feel like I've been raked through the coals. By the way, that's not something good to say in an interview, just a thought. And I thought it was funny, but it's not who I am personally. And it just came across the wrong way, and it was, you have the skills, you have the competency, you don't know enough of us here, so you need to do some networking. And by the way, you just came across as you just lacked confidence. I should have been able to walk out of those 8 hours saying, you raked me through the coals, and I survived. And I should have gone in with that attitude. I went into an interview in those 59 days where I was out of work, and my old boss was running a call center. He was the second person I walked in. It was 10 minutes after I lost my job. I walked into his office up the street. And we start talking, and I get involved in this interview. And I was told early on that people who have come from my previous company to this new one have failed miserably. So they've already had a label on me. My chances of getting the job have scrunched significantly. And I walked into this interview with this person. She's sitting in jeans. She's got rolled up sleeves. She's got tattoos all over. No problem with tattoos. It was just an interesting picture I had. And she said to me, why should I hire you? And that's how it started. And my thought process during that time brought me back to raked through the coals. Didn't say it. And I said, I'm not going to get this job, but I'm going to make you earn not hiring me for the next hour. And I had the best interview of my life. And I tried some new things that I wasn't willing to try before. I gained a ton of confidence during that time. I stretched my envelope a little bit during that time. And I used it as a great learning experience for myself. You are not going to be hired at every single interview. And that's a fact. do something with it. And if you have this lack of confidence, you're not going to get it, add back some confidence saying, I can do something with the time that I have right now. Because I'll tell you, live in the present. That's all you've got. So live in the present and do something with it. And start to learn to talk about yourself confidently. Learn to be able to put the facts out there on paper or off of the paper and have your story start to come alive. And these are some of the pitfalls that are out there. And one of the pitfalls is this look of surprise when you say to me, if you could be any type of tree in the world, what would it be and why? I don't know. How do you want me to answer that? And by the way, those comments that I've made, single thing I've talked about today may have been added with a little tone to it, but 100% of it are comments that have been made to me within interview. I don't know. I'm not sure. I can't answer that. Are all factual responses given to me. And it becomes a pitfall, this shock, this surprise. You can chuckle if you get a question that says, what type of tree would you be? I think that's kind of funny. Yeah.
Got a question, how many golf balls can you fit into a 747?
And this smile is real because it's funny. A lot. You can put an awful lot. And then you can start to have some fun with it if this is who you are and say, okay, well, if I put them in a jar here, I know 25 would fit here, and then how many jars would fit in? And start going down maybe your mathematical formulas and have some fun with it. If you really don't know, or take an analytical approach to it and say, okay, the volume of ... for all the smarter people in this room, you can go down that path. The one thing I want to teach you is don't be shy. Have some fun with it and enjoy it. But when you start to get shocked, I start to see how you deal with tension. And if you have this nervous laughter, or there's some people that have nervous laughter, I used to have it too. Just start to bring those things under control and don't be surprised. And when you start saying, I am not going to be surprised, you might throw a lot of problems at me on this new job, and I may not be able to answer them all immediately, but what I will be able to do is find support, build partnerships, go to other people that have the answers, look in and do my own research to be able to do it, and I will get you an answer. It may not be immediately, but you will get an answer. And I think that's what's important, the message that you get across. And the pitfall here is that we show the shock, this look on our face, and it leads us down this path that we don't want to go on. The other is those very short answers. I might ask you a closed-ended question, a yes-no question, and you might answer it yes or no and wait for the next question. That's an opportunity for you to take control within the interview and go down this path on your own and say, let me give you an example where I've had to do that or where I didn't do that. Has there ever been a situation where you've had a coworker stab you in the back? Yes. Now what? And let me give you an example of how I had to deal with it. And sure, we all have those type of examples. And now you're pulling from that arsenal that we talked about in situations where we've done it.
Presumably in that case, you don't then want to say yes, you take out of surgery to get it out.
No, but I would say it took 8 months to build a relationship, but I became her best friend. And I'll give you an example of how I did that. I made myself invaluable to her. And then I give examples of how I was able to do that. And this is examples based. If you're not in an intentional situation or behavioral based interview, you can turn it into one and start using these questions to build that pattern that you want to be seen on how you've been able to handle those types of situations in the past. And so you have the really short, curt answers, and then you have the really long answers, and you're boring me as an interviewer. If you find yourself rambling on, find a nice, respectful way to wrap it up so you can get to the next question. Because if you stand on 1 or 2 or 3 questions over an hour's period, you're not giving yourself enough chances to differentiate yourself from everyone else that's out there. You want to be able to get through several questions in a short period of time. It just shows your breadth of who you really are. The other thing is, and I teach this on resumes as well, I like to call it the regurgitation of your job descriptions. I don't care what you are supposed to be doing in your current job. I want to know what you've done. So we're talking in terms of resumes and interviews, skills, competencies, accomplishments. I want to know that there is proof to what you've been doing, and even if it doesn't have anything to do with your current job, but you were able to effectively do it. I'm currently working on a problem at work that has nothing to do with my job, but I just happened to grab hold of it because it needed to be resolved. It actually shows that I can stretch myself in my current role a little bit, and it's a good example of say how I've had to work with other people to come up the learning curve, and you start sharing those examples. You want to be able to show that you no longer have to just regurgitate what you're supposed to be doing in the job, but really talk about things that the skills that you own, the hard skills, software engineer, the soft skills, leadership and communication with examples, and the competencies of I am good at problem solving, I am good at analytical thinking, and that might be a competencies on how you've been analytical in your thinking. Don't ever guess. Don't make stuff up. My wife tells me I make up stuff all the time. I had her parents convinced that I knew exactly why tennis bracelet was named the tennis bracelet, and it had to do with tennis, which I don't think it really did. But, and you know, that's where you put this, you kind of put this creativity in your head, and you start going down this path. Don't guess, or don't leave the impression that it is the right answer. Leave the impression of, I'm not exactly sure, but if I was to venture a guess, you can go down that path if you want. But don't guess and leave it on the table as a fact. It may come back and haunt you. There's far too many times where we say, but you said, and think like a politician. Well, okay, let's not. But
Unless you're going for that job.
yeah, unless you're going for politics. Oh, let me give you the... But you have to think in terms of, I may not know all the answers. I'm willing to get you the answer if you need it. And I'm also willing to use my skills in past to guesstimate for you or come up with an estimation or venture a legitimate guess. But make sure that they know that you are offering an opinion or offering a judgment at that time and that you're not having to come across. And then at the end of the interview, how many times have you been asked to ask some questions? Do you go in with a list of questions? Okay. Where do you get your questions from? Everyone goes to the internet or goes to the company website. Remember, differentiate yourself. Wouldn't it be an interesting question to ask someone something about them? You know, what led you to this position? How do you define leadership? What are your top priorities for 2016? Where are the problems that I can solve? I haven't had to look up any website during those questions. And a lot of it is, one of the pitfalls is we ask these forced questions. I saw in a recent article that in 1995 your company did this. Can you tell me a little bit about the history of your company? No! Those are forced questions. It becomes this pitfall. You can have this incredible interview, but you end it with this, And remember, if you're having a legitimate conversation, this give and take, building a relationship with someone in this conversation and not having just an interview, your questions might end up getting asked and answered in the middle of that. Now, I ended up having the interview I was hired for. The guy, it was 30 minutes. It was one interview for the company. I thought it was the recruiter. He ended up being an SVP of the organization. And ends the conversation a half hour later by saying, okay, that's enough. So now tell me your opinion on the U.S. soccer team's hiring of the German coach. Because I saw you play soccer in college. And that's how we ended the interview. Because by that point, when I did have a legitimate question, and I had questions written out ahead of time, but they became natural within the conversation of, well, how would you have solved that situation? And it's not, by the way, do not push a question back on the interviewer. You don't want to get to that point where you're this rubber ball and it bounces off of you back to them. But you want to be able to say in a natural situation of, you know, here's how I would do that. Have you been in that situation at this company? Has there been a time where you had to take a very conservative approach to how you dealt with mortgages, for example? It was one of the questions that I might have had during that time. And it becomes this natural Q&A, and at the end it's, I don't have that. Because it became natural during that time. And the other, though, is be careful of, yes, do your homework, go to the website. Yes, read articles, follow things on Twitter and on LinkedIn. but also talk to people. You said you had a contact who was formerly at the organization. They're good to talk to too. What do you like about it? What did you like? Because then you can start to prepare for it. Because I know, Mike, you were talking about in your homework and preparation, how do you differentiate yourself? There's a couple tools that are in there, and they're in the packet here. One of them is called a SWOT analysis. Anyone know what SWOT analysis is? What's SWOT stand for?
Strengths,
weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Opportunities are what you would consider internal to the company or the role. Threats are external. You don't have a whole lot of control of it. A lot of it's macroeconomics, those types of things. So in the one threat in the financial industry is always overregulation. So maybe regulation comes in and they say, we become overregulated. It's a business. Maybe we don't want to be in anymore and we pull out. And so this great job I'm applying for, the threat might be, it might not be here 2 years from now. So I would put that as a legitimate threat. But you spell it out, it's 4 blockers, it's in the packet, and you can look at the details. But strengths would be, what are the strengths that you own, not just who you are or your bio, but the strengths that translate into the position that you're applying for. The weaknesses become, if you know someone who's done that job, or you knew the person who did the previous job, or you know of situations where people have been in that position, where are some of the things that can be fixed, whether it's the person or the role or the skills, or maybe one of the weaknesses would be do more with less, and the person had poor organizational skills. Well, your opportunity might be, I teach time management and organizational skills. I can help organize the position so we can legitimately do more with less. And so you point that arrow of this opportunity back to this weakness of, really, what are some of your thought processes to fix those weaknesses you just identified? So you have your strengths, which is your bio, tying nicely into how it translates into this job, and you have your opportunities fixing some of those problems that are out there. And then the threats are really for you to say, is this company going to be here for a while? Is this role going to be here for a while? Is technology replacing some of these things? And really makes you think, is this a job that you want? And yes?
Just use title of threats, because I've talked to some people who are interviewing at EMC. The Dell thing is a threat, is that true?
Yeah. And threats can be a lot of different things. It could be, terrorism could be a threat based off of the job that you're applying for that's out there, or it could be an opportunity. Maybe you're in the military, or my brother-in-law has Secret Service access to certain things, so it would actually be placed as an opportunity or a strength for him versus a threat. Depends on the person. And this whole thing, this SWOT, is for you. It is to be in your hands, in your portfolio, and it shows that you've done the homework and shows that it's something that you really want to go for. And it doesn't hurt to have an extra copy in your hand. Because then, if someone says and asks you a legitimate question, which comes out all the time, well, what did you do to prepare for this job? The natural, non-differentiating answer is, I looked at your website. I read some articles. I followed you on Twitter. I looked you up on LinkedIn. You haven't told me anything different than anyone else sitting in this room. But when you say, I started to meet with some people that currently have the role or previously been in the role, or I looked at positions that were very similar to this, and I invested some time early on to conduct a SWOT analysis. Are you familiar with that? Yeah, I used to be Six Sigma. I love SWOT analysis. I didn't realize you could do it for a job interview. Well, would you like to take a look and see what I did with it? I've done that on multiple occasions, and that turns into the interview. And all of a sudden, you now have full control back of the interview. And this isn't, by the way, a control thing. It's a comfort thing. And if you can put yourself at ease and more comfortable to talk about yourself and talk about the things that you've done and how it translates, you're going to be much more effective in the interview. So the SWOT analysis all of a sudden differentiated me from other candidates. In fact, I didn't get hired for one, and the guy said to me, can I still use your SWOT analysis? And because attached to that SWOT analysis then starts to take that opportunity, most of it's the opportunity section. The question we always get is, what will you do on day one in this organization? That's not really the question you're getting. The question you're getting is, what are you going to do on day 30, 60, and 90? And so that is, it's also in that packet that's there. It's a multi-generation plan. I call it a multi-generation plan. It is what you want to do in your first month there, in your second month there, in your third month there. So on day one, I'm going to meet everyone I work with. Guess what? 8 hours is up now. But what you want to do on day 30 says, I'm going to talk to the key stakeholders of my organization. I'm going to determine which other parts of this organization impact the people that I'm working with. I might talk about who's internal, who's external. I might talk about, are there regulatory impacts? Are there other certain things? And so what you put, your columns will be 30, 60, 90. Your rows can be whatever you want them to be. Sometimes I've used DMAIC, design, measure, analyze from some of the analytical jobs that I was looking into. But maybe you're getting into a school function. And so maybe your rows might be, how do I deal with school administration and teachers, parents, students? What do I want to do in my first 30 days with the students? What do I want to do in 60 days with the students? What do I want to do in 90 days? So maybe by day 60 or day 90, you might hold a focus group. Might be some of your strategies. Are you expected to do everything that's on it? No, but it's strategic thinking. And it gets you thinking independently, strategically, and tactically. Because every time that I've ever done this, I have a high percentage chance of getting hired. It has become my task list on day one. And I've taken these 30, 60, 90s and I've built out my next 3 months. And now I'm hitting the ground running when I do start my job, and your impact becomes that much more influential, that much quicker.
The comment on that is that there are in fact books on 30, 60, 90 and on the web and other places there are generic 30, 60, 90s if you're a sales manager or something like that. So it gives you a framework you can work on. You just start from the beginning.
On that, I interviewed many candidates. I've seen that done. A lot of candidates put the time and effort into the strategic, but they have no idea how to put it into operation. So don't overthink here's what I'm going to do, because you will be asked how. And if you don't have an answer, well, thank you very much. Good luck.
And it should be, here are examples where I've done this in the past.
Correct.
And so each one of these should be, I've been able to do this effectively, or these are some lessons that I learned from the last time I did it that I can bring into the new one. But they are, again, it's not one of those, and I get annoyed, I guess, as an interviewer when someone thrusts their resume in front of me, and I've had people with binders that have their certificates and accomplishments, and they thrust that in front of me. I don't want something thrust in front of me unless I specifically ask for it. And I'm usually not going to, if I see the binder, I usually won't ask for it. But because I want you to have your story come alive. Don't make me do all the work as the interviewer. Make it easy for me with phrases such as, let me give you an example when. And when you can start to do that, and you start to say, well, let me give you situational-based times where I've received a certificate of accomplishment. And I can say, let me do this. And if someone says, what have you done? Or what homework have you done? What preparation have you done? Well, one of the things that I did, in addition to look at your website, I also invested some time to make sure that I was a good match for this position by putting together a SWOT analysis. And I took that into a multi-generation plan, a 30, 60, 90-day plan. Are you interested in seeing that? And then the natural answer is going to be, sure. And I've given to them, and half the time people have taken it and it's turned into a brand new conversation. Half the people said thanks for doing that, we'll take a look at it later, and it may or may not pay dividends later. But it shows the effort without coming out saying, look at me and look at the effort. It comes out and simply says, I'm prepared and I'm ready for this conversation, and you're not just some other checklist of this desperation of me looking for a job. It is, I put in an effort to get to where I am. The next page on here is dealing with vanishing nerves. But the things I want to emphasize here is you are not competing against anyone. And I know it's easy to say and hard to do, and you are your only competition. So if you only worry about yourself in the skills that you have and the competencies that you have, you're going to be so much better. You want to be able to get into the preparations with the SWOTs and the multi-generation plans. But don't try to get into a situation where you're memorizing answers or talk to people, what question did you get asked when you were in that. You don't want to start filling your head with these answers. You want to go back and get to know yourself as best that you can. You've got to psych yourself up for the interview if you have to, but it means that you've got to believe that you're the right candidate for the job, or don't bother doing it. And even if you say, I think I'm the right person, you're on the right path. I have the skills to do that should really be the basic piece that you get down to is, I have the skills to do this, why couldn't I? And then you've got to believe that you've got a shot at this thing, because it's going to change your mentality. And this isn't one of those psych you up, get motivated, get inspired. You've got to truly believe you have the skills to do it. That's why I go back to, it's not bragging if it's a fact. The fact is you have skills. The fact is you have accomplishments. The fact is you should be sitting across from that person. Are there other qualified candidates? Absolutely. But do you believe that you've got a shot? You've got to be able to believe that you do. And you relax a little bit on the mental side of it. I'll give you Toastmasters 101. On the mental side of it, you've got to believe that you want to be there. You set yourself up for routine for that day. If you go to Dunkin' Donuts every morning, go to Dunkin' Donuts that morning. Don't try to change up because it's going to throw you off mentally. But put yourself into a mental situation. And then physically is slow down on the caffeine. Don't get to a point where you're shaking uncontrollably because of caffeine. But if you exercise, get into exercise, get the blood flowing a little bit. And right before you go in, and it's going to be cliche-ish, but get the shoulders and neck and head and get yourself loosened up. But treat it as if it will loosen you up. And if you do this and get yourself nice and loose, it will set the tone. It will set the tone right from the beginning. And those are just quick tips. But in regards to being a match for this thing, there are going to be times where you're going to say, I just want an interview. But you don't have to. I know that jobs are few and far between, but you also want to make sure it's a good match. And so we've talked about the job description part of it, but also think in terms of the considerations. And you want to consider things that are not at the top of your head, but you want to put them at the top of your head. And that might be the shift. Are there different shifts? In a hospital, you might have weekend shifts or night shifts. Is that the case, or is it an administrative 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, or when they define part-time, how is part-time defined to that organization? Make sure that you're asking these questions. These are legitimate questions to ask. What's the training? And if there is training, what type of training? Is it one-on-one? Is it classroom? Is my classroom training going to be during a different time than what my scheduled shift is, which can have implications on your family life? And you want to ask those questions. Is there shift differential? Could you gain benefits by speaking a different language? If you speak Spanish, is that going to help you in your new job? Those are some questions you want to ask. Dress code. Dress code has changed significantly over time. Some people can work in pajamas at home, but if you have to walk into the office, are you expected to wear a tie? And if I don't wear a tie, is someone going to look down on me? And so you want to ask these questions, and they seem so simple, but it also shows your interest, and it shows that you're willing to do your homework. What's the attendance policy? What's the tardiness policy? If you've ever had an issue in the past, you might want to walk down this path. If you're perfect in attendance, maybe you're okay. Maybe you change that into personal time or PTO time or vacation time and ask those types of questions. How much time to get off? These are not questions you ask in the first interview. These are questions you might want to ask throughout the interview as you're getting there. They shouldn't be on your first list to ask before you ask them a question, but these you want to take it into consideration. Parking. Welcome to Boston. Is there parking? Do you have to commute? Those types of impacts. You want to ask these questions. And what's the incentive compensation? My very first job, I graduated from college on a Friday, started on a Monday. About a month later, somebody handed me a check. I said, what's this for? They said, you hit your goal and you get incentive for it. And I said, oh, that would have been nice to know. Hey, it didn't hurt. But are there additional incentives or bonuses that come along with it that you might not know about? The catchphrase these days is total compensation value. What's the value? So your base salary might look low on paper, but when you start adding these things in, like benefits and extra bonuses and quarterly bonuses, and extra compensation, all of a sudden this value package becomes a whole lot different. So be willing to ask those questions, those you want to take into consideration. There's a piece in here on mock interviewing, and due to time, we'll move past this. So my key points on mock interviews is it's not your chance to experiment. Treat it like a real interview. It's not your chance to memorize answers, but do it. Do it now before the interview. Don't cram for it 3 days before with someone. Talk to people on a regular basis. And that doesn't mean if you are currently working your current manager, it doesn't mean friends and family. It means talk to somebody who might be familiar with the organization. Say, I'd like to just put me through a mock interview. And what you're doing by doing that is you're constantly putting yourself under pressure in those pressure-filled situations. And when you do it more often, your anxiety goes down a lot more, and you become a lot more prepared. And you start figuring out situations where you're saying, God, I know that there's a story or an example where I've done that before. I just can't remember exactly what it is. Go check your resume. Go check some files that you have. Bring the story back up alive, and now you have a good story to tell. And you're starting to build that arsenal again. So conduct mock interviews as much as you possibly can. And a lot of times when it comes to mock interviewing, it's part of the networking, and some people think that it's kissing up or just trying to meet with someone at a different level if you are currently employed. Treat it as a mock interview. If you treat it as a live interview, and that this is for a real life job, it's going to prepare you for when the time really does come. So I'm going to stop here until we get into the meat of some of this behavioral-based stuff. Any questions or comments so far? Yeah.
If you have not knocked at the job, is it okay to ask for feedback? Like, what could I have done to restore food? I don't know how you ask that. And I know some people aren't comfortable giving you an answer.
You should ask the question 100% of the time,
Yeah.
and you should expect the answer not very much. Because there are lawsuits, potential lawsuits, people's willingness to give you feedback may not be there, but in mock interviews, they are there. And in the mock interview, the one thing you want to make sure that you're doing is it's not the stop, go. Treat it as a full-blown interview, and then at the end of it, talk about feedback. Don't get feedback in the middle of it because it takes away from the real flow of what's happening. But it's a legitimate question to ask. I was that same position where I was number 3 to oversee 2 positions of 750 people. I didn't get. I called the person. We set up some time 2 weeks later, and we had a feedback meltdown. And I said, talk to me. I was given some generic feedback of I didn't know the people well enough here. Who do you suggest I meet with? And treat it as a networking session. And that's how I treated it. I said, I didn't really get to know you in the 30 minutes, so let's spend some time to get to know you. He called me 6 months later and said, guess what? Both people ended up leaving the job for a variety of reasons. The job's yours. I didn't take it because I had something else that was going there. But that relationship established it. And when you come across desperate I didn't get it, give me the feedback, please, they're not going to give it to you. But if you say at the end, hey, listen, if you have any feedback for me, I'd love to have it. If you want to send me a note after, I'd love to have it and set the tone. Or do you mind if we reach out, even, I don't want to say even if I don't get the job, because that might set the tone too. But if you say, do you mind if I stay in touch with you? It's a good way to end it as well. Or is there anyone else in this organization that you would suggest I network with? And you treat this conversation as a network. You're just continuing to let your network do the work for you. And the interview is just one of those by-the-way type things. So, if you could be any type of tree in the world, what would it be and why? Anyone care to answer?
One of the dogs don't pee.
So one of the dogs don't
Good thinking, Jack.
So much.
The one what?
The dogs don't.
The dog don't pee.
I'll be editing this out of the video. So on a resume, side note on resumes, or anyone have, well, don't answer the question. How effective are objectives these days on resumes? Not very. Put your personal, start to tell your story, your elevator speech really on your profile. But I did see a resume, and it had noted in the objective, will work like dogs for peanuts. So I told my wife about it. She said, well, tell him he's barking at the wrong tree. She's funny, I'm not. But there's nothing wrong with that question. What's your first thought when I say if you could be any type of tree? Pine, maple, oak, birch.
Giant sequoia.
Giant sequoia.
Live like 100,000 years.
Banyan. But you have, this is part of thinking quickly on your feet. We answer the immediate question and then we say, now. We start thinking in terms of birch, oak, sell me this pen. And we like, okay, and then we come up with a sales plan about sell me this pen. You're answering the question too legitimately, too literally. You are answering the question and somebody's going to ask you, now. Is anyone going to ask you what type of tree you're going to be? No, so don't memorize the answer, but memorize your thought process on how to get to the right place, how to differentiate yourself, how to be confident, how to be creative. So I'm sitting around this high school, and I asked a bunch of kids, if you could be any type of tree in the world, it goes around birch, maple, oak, blah, 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 pine tree, because it's ever living, oak tree, because it has strong roots, blah, blah, blah. And this kid's, that'd be a cactus. Now, is cactus a tree? I have no idea, nor do I care. Because I'm not looking for the perfect answer. I said because this kid, I thought, I knew from the beginning he was going to be different. But I thought he was just going to be trouble. And so there it is, ha ha, class clown. I'm going to be a cactus. Because every once in a while, an animal will start to burrow in and start to feed off. And I'll start to feed off of that. I wish more people would get to know me. And then he sat down. And there's a point in the story of he differentiated himself. He shocked me creatively. He was very thoughtful in his answer. He could think quickly on his feet. And some people try to throw in a big Christmas tree. And they started to go down that path. This isn't about being quirky. It's being about unique enough that someone's going to remember who you are. If you say maple, we may not remember who you are. If you say oak, we may not remember who you are. Everyone's going to come down to a very similar answer to who you are. I'm a sturdy tree. I'm a weeping willow. I cry over every day. Whatever it might be, we're going to remember the tree itself, and we're not going to remember who you are as an individual unless you give it something solid that comes behind. There are going to be answers relating to your work past or your work history. And so we talked a little bit about the homework that's on there and how to do the homework. And someone might ask you what differentiates yourself from others. But again, it's not about memorizing who you are and how to differentiate yourself. It's start to come up with things that you already have in your arsenal. So you might want to start taking notes of how do you differentiate yourself. If you have trouble in talking about what your greatest accomplishments are, write down your 3 greatest accomplishments. Have you ever been asked what are your 3 greatest strengths? Have you ever been asked what are your 3 greatest weaknesses? Have we all struggled with some of those questions? Because when we hear give me your top 3, we think David Letterman. We think in terms of list. And so I'm going to give you this list of 3 things. And now you're thinking the wrong way. You're thinking in terms of list. Think in terms of impact. And if you take that second to take a breath and say, And when it comes to weaknesses, what is our biggest struggle when it comes to talking about our weaknesses?
You want to make it
Exposure.
Exposure. Oh, I'm vulnerable. I've learned I would hold it all in. I've learned to be completely vulnerable in a professional way, that you're starting to make a statement and build that pattern about yourself. The pattern I usually leave people with at the end of the interview is I've made a ton of mistakes. And I've learned from them all, and it's made me a better person, and it's made me a better professional. It's typically the route I like to take in an interview. Because I have this willingness to make mistakes and willingness to share them with people. And it, in that particular case, makes it very differentiating from a lot of the other candidates that are going through that job. If you have this, so let's talk about some weaknesses. Let's throw a couple out there. Anybody? I'll share all of mine and go on for hours.
Introverted.
Okay, I'm very introverted. So one of my weaknesses is I'm very reflective on myself. A lot of people might call it, they might say that I'm introverted, but introverted has a very negative connotation. So I want to be careful in talking about this as a weakness. What this really means to me is I like to find answers, and I like to have one-on-one more effective than one-on-ones. But I'm very analytical. I go in and I look for information, whether it's on the internet. I love to read. That just means I love to gather information in a different sort of way. Sure, I'm not going to be out there, and by the way, I am introverted. Can I sit in front of 25 people and talk to you? Yes, because it's a skill I've learned. And so that's my other weakness, communication. I was told for 20 years I couldn't communicate on my performance appraisal. And so I had to finally take some actions and do something about it, and I joined Toastmasters International, and I started to go down that path, and I've learned to gain confidence, and I learned to be more clear and concise in my ability. So in both cases, are they weaknesses? Your strengths are your weaknesses. Your weaknesses are your strengths. And so you can have some fun with it if they give them to you side by side, say, give me your strengths and weaknesses. You can say, in reality, they're the same thing because they are mistakes that I've made or weaknesses that I chose to work on to turn them into my strengths. A lot of people will come out with a weakness answer and say, I don't have any weaknesses. Well, there's one. It's this, they either have such a high level of thinking for themselves, or they're so insecure they're not willing to put it on the table. Both of those traits are not good patterns you want to establish with anyone. And so you're putting yourself into a weaker situation by withholding information. Deny, deny, deny. And we've heard that. It doesn't work in interviews, by the way. You want to be able to put your vulnerable self out there. So, back to the point of, when you're writing down your greatest accomplishments, or you're writing down, these are chances to start build out your portfolio, build out your arsenal. And so write these notes down for yourself and start to build out your marketing plan. And so you might say a weakness might be the word introvert. You might want to start putting examples where how you've overcome being an introvert, because there are so many effective and successful introverts that are out there. You might want to even bring one in. Here's an example of someone who's an effective introvert. So I get cautious about using that in the negative sense, but if you were to call it a weakness, I could, and then you can go down that path and share some examples with it. So you want to start building down lists of examples, and that gets you to learning about yourself and being willing to talk about yourself more than anyone else. Because you can have a list of 27 accomplishments, and when they say top 3, you just pluck any of the 3 off and you go in confident. So I know we're running out of time here, so what type of questions or comments do you have about this type of approach?
One question, some of us, I won't say all of us, some of us are older job applicants. What we talk about here is kind of generic, like for pretty much any age. Any specific ideas for the older interviewer?
Yeah, you're not older. You're accomplished.
Experience. You
No,
are
not
experienced. We
experience.
can play the
Accomplished is
cliche
what you want to say.
piece here, but there's also there's a lot of work and research out there on generational differences.
Exactly.
And so I do something on generational differences. I have a program on it. And the first thing you learn is we have to be cautious with the blanket statements that we make. And that there is discrimination. There's inadvertent discrimination. There's overt discrimination. It depends on which organization. But be careful with those statements and throwing them out there. But I might be able to say, I'm 47 years old. I know I'm on the upper echelon. If I was to lose my job, that I was dealing with that 2 years ago. So at the age of 45, I had to deal with that. And so you might want to say, so one of the differentiating things that I could say is I've done research for the last 10 years on generational differences. And so as an experienced person coming in, I can, I know how to deal. This is the first time in our generation where we have 4 generations working in the same place. And we're about to come in on the 5th generation, coming in, Gen Z. And so I can take that path down. But you might want to also say, instead of saying the word I am experienced, that should be your topic header. And then you say, well, where are some places that you're experienced? Do you have managerial experience? Do you have administrative experience? Do you have programming experience? Do you have, I've been dealing with a lot of people in the publishing business recently and writing their resumes and how to take those skills and move them somewhere else. And the thing that we've come up with that's a commonality between all of them is a lot of them are in their 40s. They're very conscious of what's happening within the publishing industry, and it's turning to ebooks, and you've got to have a significant platform, so the selling books is going to be more difficult. But their selling point is, I've also been through various cycles and changes that have happened in the growth of the book business. So to people that are in the medical field, for example, can say, here's how the medical device field has changed over the last 15 years. I've been an active part of it, and here's how I've succeeded when it's taken the dip. Or here's what we've done to get more creative to jump over that. A good example is marketing and sales. In a recession, what do most companies do? They start holding back their advertising and marketing. Go back and look at all the successful companies that have not only survived but thrived during those times, were people that went out and put more advertising out there. And so that might be an example of where everyone was going against the tide, or going with the tide. We went against it. And let me give you an example where I was able to solve a problem using my experience that I can bring to your organization.
One thing that's always stuck with me, I once asked a question of a lady who was a corporate recruiter who interviewed thousands of people. And I said, what is the biggest mistake that older interviewees make in courses? And somebody tells you that this person's old. And of course she said, I'll be able to take this right. I finally figured it out. And this is something I think for all of us to consider, is that the biggest mistake in her mind was when she would ask a person a question. Instead of answering the question, they reminisce. And I think we have a tendency to do that because we get so much experience and we have a lack of confidence perhaps, and we want to say, well gee, I've done this 10 times, and we don't want to know.
And a good example of that, and this isn't age-based, this is, we're not sure where to go, so we live in the past. And I have a colleague that does this all the time. Well, and he and I actually worked at the old organization, so I know exactly what he's talking about. And when every sentence starts with, that's not the way we used to do it, or that's not the way in how we did it in my previous organization, or we did it this way in my organization, a couple times is fresh ideas. 7 or 8 times is, here we go again. And it's the same type of thing in reminiscing is, are you living in the past, or are you moving towards the future? And if you say, I can use my experience to tell you how I can translate these past skills into new ones, and if you're going to use the word experienced, or well-established, or stable where we are, just have them come up with live examples that you can use it. And if you're reminiscing, that's okay. Be clear and concise in that reminiscing of, let me give you an example where I did have to use that experience. And keep it short, clear, concise, and then hold it back. But I think that's a very good point you brought, is a lot of people have a tendency to live in the past and do reminisce.